Welcome to week 3. This week we're looking at the FDA, specifically Center for Food Safety and Applied Nutrition. And as this old photo shows, we're actually going back in time as we did last week and looking at its predecessor agency, what was known as the Bureau of Chemistry. And it's an interesting progression, and if you're a history buff, I think you'll get into the discussion how we went from basically a chemistry lab that was in the patent office that was taken through this process of eventually becoming what we would call the Food and Drug Administration. I don't know about you, but when I think of the FDA, many things do come to mind, but I don't think of this classic laboratory environment. And if you've ever visited the White Oak campus, you'd be hard-pressed, I think, to find this on the White Oak campus. There may be analytical labs that the FDA uses if they're not already using third-party labs, but this definitely isn't the modern vision of what the FDA is. And we have this background in chemistry coming from the father of the Food and Drug Administration and really of the Pure Food and Drug Act, what we now call the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, Harvey Washington Wiley. It's always going to be a good story when you have George Washington's name in it, of course, and this person was no exception. A chemist by trade, as you can see in all the images sort of him that you can find on the archives, are him being a classic chemist, and he was the chief chemist of the Bureau of Chemistry, so that was his role. And he really pushed and pioneered the passage of the Pure Food and Drug Act, and we're going to talk about that in the audio lecture, and really molded the Bureau of Chemistry in a way that I think has remained the influence of what the FDA is today, an analytical component and an enforcement component. And as part of what we're going to talk about in the audio lecture is how much is the same and how much has changed. And we're going to use the example of rolled gold pretzels and an inspection from 1926, 1927 by the Bureau of Chemistry. At that point, hadn't morphed into the Food, Drug, and Insecticide Agency or the FDA. It was still the Bureau of Chemistry and still under the Pure Food and Drug Act, so the very early act, doing something that would look very familiar to us today, taking this recipe for butter pretzels and asking the question, can they put butter in the name of the product? Now, obviously, we have different questions today, but this is still one that would come up today is, can we put a name like butter in the food when it may not actually contain that ingredient or not contain it 100%? We're seeing that now with mayonnaise, some of the eggless vegan versions of mayonnaise. Can we call it mayonnaise? Or milk alternatives, can we call them milk? So here we are in 2018, 2019, having this discussion about when a product can claim it is containing an ingredient or like an ingredient. Different standard. We have standard of identities now. We didn't have standard of identities in 1926, but it looks a lot the same. And so it's kind of interesting as we have this discussion to say how much of the 1906 Act has kept the mold the way it's been cast all along, and how much of it is changed. Maybe our focus has changed, but our overall structure hasn't. So the key questions are going to be the same, I think, from last week, and honestly probably throughout the discussion, is how is the 1906 structure and enabling acts set us up for what we have today? How are those going to be fixed in a way that we can get things that are falling through the cracks and find ways to make it work, even though we're not having one single parent agency? And we're going to hit on all those topics in the audio lecture, and I'll join you there.